Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by a number one New York Times best-selling author of over 50 novels. His most recent novel is Murder by Design, which just came out 3 days ago. He's also written for a lot of different TV shows, many of which you've probably seen. That's right, it's your favorite writer of mine, Lee Goldberg. Lee, how the heck are you?
I'm great. I'm exhausted just hearing you talk about all that stuff. I have to go work on that stuff now. Bye. So,
That's right. In the green room, we were talking about it's been a very full day for you, a lot of Zooms, and in between all of that,
work
you're going to have to do
calls.
some writing because you basically are now on like a two book a year, which is a two book a year, book contract for any writer is a lot. But on top of that, you're doing stuff with TV and God knows whatever else. So we're gonna get into all that. So what I usually try to do, well, actually, you know what? You have a Wikipedia, which I'm sure you know, and usually when I talk to writers or narrators or whoever who have Wikipedias, I like to do kind of like a Rich Eisen, celebrity true or false, to see, what's accurate here on your Wikipedia, which
Oh
is
God,
actually
I
a
haven't
very, very
looked at
long
my
pick. Yeah.
Wikipedia forever. Okay.
Well, let's say this. You began your career as a journalist covering local news and the police beat for the Contra Costa Times.
Yes, it's now called the East Bay Times. It's in Northern California. But yes, I started writing for them.
And also, you know what? I want to talk about your first novel because this is very fascinating. I chatted with your brother a couple months back, and he had mentioned kind of offhand, well, first of all, for a young Lee Goldberg, what was the initial kind of dream? What did you want to do when you were growing up? What was the
I
plan?
I wanted to do exactly what I am doing now. I mean, I am the luckiest son of a bitch you'll ever meet. I am doing exactly what I dreamed of, and I'm doing exactly what I was doing when I was 10 years old. I am still when I was 10 years old, I was sitting at a typewriter telling stories, listening to TV themes, and eating junk food. I'm doing exactly the same thing now, only people are paying me for it. I mean, my dream came true. If you hear me complain, you can shoot me. I got nothing to complain about. And it's not like I had friends in television or friends in publishing. I just had the dream and the passion, and I educated myself and put myself in position for the good luck to happen. That's the advice I give people is put yourself in the position for the good luck to happen. You talked about my first novel. I actually have, see if I can show it to you. There it is. The oil, there we go. Yeah, that's the oil painting that was the cover for my first novel, 357 Vigilante. And back in the day, it was a series of four books. They kept the upper portion the same and just changed the lower portion to match whatever the plot of that book was. So the lower portion actually underneath there has three other images. And if you scrape the paint off, you'd probably see the other images. But I put myself through school writing about the entertainment industry and as a freelance writer, but also in the summers going back to the San Francisco Bay Area and covering the police beat. So by doing that, by interviewing people who were successful in entertainment and publishing, I gave myself a graduate education in those fields. And by covering the police beat, I gave myself the police procedural background I would need to someday write crime novels. And I also was working on the UCLA Daily Bruin, and our journalism advisor was writing spy novels for Pinnacle, and he would show me his manuscripts, and I would criticize them. I'd give him my point of view about his international spy novels, even though I'd never left the country. And I'd criticize his sex scenes, even though I had had very little sex. I was an expert on everything. And one day his publisher came to him and asked him if he would write a men's action adventure novel, which were sort of the male equivalent of the Harlequin romance. They had titles like The Executioner, The Destroyer, The Immolator, The Drooler, The Defecator. They all looked the same. Some guy, like on the cover of mine, with a big gun and explosions in the background and women with giant breasts. And you found them at shopping, anyway, at checkout stands and finer 7-Elevens around the country. And he said that he wasn't hungry enough, desperate enough, or stupid enough to write one of these books. But he knew somebody who was, and he recommended me. And so I knew Lee Goldberg wasn't a great name for an author. So I came up with Ian Ludlow. So I'd be on the shelf next to Robert Ludlum and Ian for Ian Fleming. So people would go, Ian Ludlow, I think I read something by him. It wasn't bad. And I was very fortunate. My first 357 Vigilante novel came out the same week this guy Bernard Getz blew away some muggers on a New York subway train. So Vigilantes were hot. New World Pictures bought the movie rights and hired me to write the script. And that's how my screenwriting career was born. And then I've been on that dual track for the last 40 years. writing books and writing cop shows and other shows.
So, prior to that, had you planned on writing a book? I mean, had you
Oh
written
God,
other novels, or
I
like
had
was this the very first one?
I wrote so many books when I was a kid. I mean, I wrote rip-offs of The Saint and rip-offs of other detective novels, and I would show them to my neighbors, and I would send them to publishers and get rejected. I mean, I was a kid. What did I know? I wrote a book called Tomorrow's Warrior about a guy from the future who comes to the past to stop a crime from happening. Sort of like Terminator before Terminator. And I had him being born in an underwater sperm bank. I have no idea why I was underwater or how you made deposits, but it seemed very cool to me. And I wrote all these things, so I was ready when I got my opportunity to do the vigilante novel. I had work I could show. I was ready for it. I was self-taught, as I think all writers are, but I also was taking English classes and creative writing classes at school. But I read a lot, and I put myself in an environment for, like, as I said before, luck to happen. I covered the entertainment industry and publishing, so I interviewed the people I admired to learn how they did what they did. I worked for the Daily Bruin, so I put myself around people who had the same interests as me. Our journalism advisor wrote novels. I became his friend, and he talked to me about the publishing business and how he wrote novels and how they sold and didn't sell. And so an opportunity came his way, and he was able to recommend it to me, and I was able to do it. And that's what I'm sort of mean by putting yourself in a position for luck to happen. And because I had been on the police beat, I had some real world stuff I could draw upon, some realism I could infuse in these books, even though I had very little life experience.
Yeah. So, did you find being a journalist helped you? Because I think it was Michael Connolly had talked about, being a journalist. He found that it helped him like write fast and also write tight. Where he just because he had always had to write with a deadline. That did you find that being the journalist then helped you, or in a way it maybe hampered you, or
Absolutely helped me because you have to tell a story. You get all these notes and all these quotes, and you have to put them together into a compelling story with a strong lead that builds. But you also have to be dispassionate about your work because your work will be edited. It also will be cut for space in a newspaper or a magazine. And you're dealing with deadlines. And you have to quickly decide on a point of view for your story, a framework, and which quotes you're going to use, and how you're going to portray the characters. But these are not characters, they're real people. So how do you get across who they are by using the best quote and the best bit of description? So yes, it allowed me to learn a lot about a whole lot of different fields and to write very quickly under a deadline and also to accept editing. Too many writers today don't know how to be edited, don't know how to open themselves up for criticism, don't know how to tell good criticism from bad criticism. And then I mean, we can get more into it, but I think that's kind of the problem with self-publishing now, is too many writers think just because I can click a mouse and get online, I'm a published author, and they don't understand what it's like to be edited or to have a work shaped so it's actually commercial fiction, so it can sell. And it's a bonus, but also a plus the way self-publishing has been made it so easy for everybody to get onto Amazon and into bookstores.
yeah. Yeah, I especially back during like what I always call the gold rush days, which I'm sure you remember the gold rush days where you
Yeah,
could like upload a novel and sell thousands in a week or a month without doing anything. Those days are far behind. But I always said when I would talk to newer or for certain writers who were considering it, it was just like, well, just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. Because, yes, there are some great benefits with self-publishing. And well, actually, let's talk about that. So I think the very first time I really became aware of you was we had shared the same designer. I remember Blake Crouch had hooked me up with a guy from New Zealand. You said, and I always get his name wrong because I always
your
want to
own.
pronounce the J. Right.
Yeah.
And I remember he was doing some of your covers. He was doing Blake's covers. And I think around that time, your first book ended up going with Thomas and Mercer, and then you started doing the Dead Man series, which I do want to talk a little bit about. But before that, based on your bio, it mentions your first novels, the Ludlow pen name series that the publisher promptly went out of business, and you never saw a
Yeah,
dime in royalties,
that's true.
which is funny. I mean. I don't know. I always tell people like publishing is just an awful, awful business. The only reason people stay in it is because they love writing, they love telling stories. But I felt like like right out of the gate, you basically realize like, oh, like I don't know, like going into it, did you have like the dreams like every other writer being like, oh, I'm going to sell 1 million copies. My
Of
books are going to be on the
course.
New York Times
Of
list.
course. I mean, my book exploded. It was a huge success when it first came out because of Bernie Getz
Right.
and vigilantes being hot, but also the hook that I was only a teenager and I was writing these books. I got an extraordinary amount
Yeah,
of press.
how old were you exactly?
I think I mean, it blurs in my mind because it was so long ago. And I know I started it when I think I was 18, but maybe the book didn't come out till I was 19, somewhere in there. And then the
Yeah.
books were still coming out um, when I graduated. So it's and there was the movie involved there too, but there was a lot of publicity I got because of the obvious hook.
Hmm.
And to be honest with you, because I was a mercenary about it, I was a journalist. I knew how to write a press release. I knew that that was going to be a great hook for writers out there. So I created a fake PR firm called the Media Syndicate with stationery, and I created a fake publicist. I did the Donald Trump. I sent out press releases everywhere about 18-year-old kid writes best-selling vigilante novel, and I would set up my interviews as the thing is I could do my dad's voice. My dad was an anchorman on KPIX in San Francisco. And he always talked like this, Robert. He always talked like he was on the air, whether he was or wasn't. And he had the same insincere smile on his face that I have right now. So even as a kid, I could do my dad's voice and not sound just like me. I could sound like somebody else entirely. And I was able to, set up interviews for myself or have my girlfriend do it for me as a publicist, pretending she was my publicist. And I got a lot of press. I mean, the LA Times wrote about me, and I mean, a bunch of magazines and newspapers all across the country. There were TV shows. Entertainment Tonight had me on. It was great. But then I didn't see a dime. The publisher went under and they locked up my books for I think it was 14 years, 15 years before I got the rights back.
Wow.
It was a huge bankruptcy. I mean, it just took forever to get my material back.
So was it considered like, like a right for hire thing, or like this was your IP? Like they just
This
wanted
is
somebody
my
to write
IP.
this type of book.
This is my IP. One of the reasons I had to choose the name Ian Ludlow was so if I ever stopped writing the books, they could hire ghostwriters and no one would ever know that
Mm,
I was gone. Um, but it became an asset of Pinnacles, and they had bigger names to deal with, and it was just the bankruptcy was very complex, and then different publishers cherry picked pieces of Pinnacle and bought it, and it
yeah.
just took 15 years for me to get my rights back. And when I finally did, I self-published those books on Amazon on the Kindle, but under my own name this time instead of
Yeah.
Ian Ludlow.
So you know what? Since you were part of that gold rush time period, I sometimes talk to people about this, and I feel like they weren't really like, they don't remember those days. I always had this conspiracy theory, and you can tell me if I'm completely half baked on this, that I feel like Amazon was kind of juicing the algorithm for these indie authors, so that they were making these like big sales, because again, like a lot of those big name authors back then, you never see them anymore.
Well, you have to put it in a context of where the world was at the time. No, I don't think Amazon was goosing the algorithm. I think what it was is the Kindle was a new device and there wasn't a lot of material for that device. So the self-published authors filled a void because a lot of the big publishers were very hesitant about putting their toe into the ebook market. And then when they did, they were pricing the books way too high and nobody wanted to buy them. And there was a big dispute. I don't know if you remember all the details
Oh
between
yes.
Amazon and the
Oh
publishers. And
yes.
so it took a while before big publishers jumped in and also jumped in at a price point that made their books attractive to ebook readers. Charging $29.99 for an ebook is not going to get people to grab it. It just they wanted it to be cheaper than the print copy, and the publishers were so interested in protecting the print editions that they made the ebooks unattractive to buy, financially speaking. So yeah, there was a voracious desire to gobble up ebooks for the Kindle by readers. And so they were accepting books that were not necessarily at a certain level. Well, once professional authors got in there and the works were really good, well, you now had to compete. I don't mean you, but just a self-published author. You're on the same shelf with James Patterson. That's great, but you better be as good as James Patterson. And 99.9% of the self-published authors were not. Most self-published stuff was swill. I mean, and the good stuff was good enough. And there were some who went on to write, great big careers, obviously. But the vast majority of it just wasn't that good, and that's why it didn't sustain. That's why they had their gold rush and they cashed in and they disappeared. I can't remember the name of that author who was writing 99-cent detective novels and was
John
making
Locke.
what the hell happened to him? He just
And he had
there are a
that
lot of
deal.
those.
He had that distribution deal with Simon and Schuster, where you were seeing the like I think the mass market paperbacks. I think that he was
Uh,
paying for. I forget, but anyway,
I will say
uh,
this about Amazon and him. I mean, I can talk about it because these executives are now long gone. They were laughing at him. This idiot is pricing his books at 99 cents. We're making all the money and he's not. If he raised the price to 2.99, he'd make more and he'd still sell plenty of books. He's insane. He's left so much money on the table. And they were
yeah,
like, we if that's what he wants to do, fine. But it was a bad business move.
yeah. Let's get into your TV. Actually, no. Before that, when you were a kid, when you were writing these books, writing these stories, like what were you reading at that time? Like, had it always been you wanted to be a crime, thriller writer, or like were you reading other types of books or watching other types of TV shows, movies for inspiration?
I was voracious. I wanted to do everything. I mean, my favorite author was Larry McMurtry, and he was writing contemporary
Mm,
fiction and westerns. I was reading westerns. I was reading crime novels. I was reading thrillers. I was reading contemporary, fiction. I didn't read a lot of science fiction. I've never been that into reading science fiction, though I've worked on science fiction TV shows. But mostly crime novels, mostly literary fiction, lots of westerns, a lot of pulp fiction, women's fiction even. I like to read. I like to read different things. And if a book made me laugh, if a book made me cry, if a book I read a lot of horror too. If a book scared the crap out of me, I would be meticulous about going back and trying to figure out how did you know Stephen King scare the crap out of me? How did John Saul scare me? How'd they do it? What was it about the printed word on the page that evoked that emotion for me, where I was actually terrified to look at the book? And then I had to learn what those tricks were, or how did I get fooled in this mystery? And I go back and I see the clues were all there. How was I misdirected? I would study these books so I could learn how to do the same thing. How did if you got aroused by a book, you're all turned on reading a book. How did just words on a page, make you hot? I mean, how did words on a page make you cry? How did words on a page make you vomit? How do words on a page bore you? That's easier. But do you have to also look at that and say, why did the author lose me? What mistakes did he make that I wasn't interested in the story or the characters? And I learned from that too. And I would take a book and just take it apart. I would write down everything that happened in the book and how many pages it took and what the plot turns were so that I could understand how the magic trick was accomplished.
So, are you somebody, or and maybe this has changed over the years, but are you somebody who is more of a plotter, pantser, more of a hybrid in between?
I've always been a plotter. And I would argue in most cases, when I read a book, I can tell if someone plotted it or if they're making it up when they go along. I can feel them treading narrative water, waiting to find their story. And when they find it, they go off in that direction. They don't go back and rewrite the treading of narrative water. And, the sloppy way the book comes together at the end and doesn't tie up all the clues and doesn't entirely make sense. I'm a plotter. I want to know where I'm going, particularly in a whodunit. You need to know where the clues are because it's not just telling a story, it's a magic trick. It's a puzzle. And you have to be true to the genre and fair to the audience. And that doesn't mean I won't deviate from my outline. I have what I call living outlines. I'm rewriting the outline as I write the book. I tend to finish my outline about 10 days before I finish the book because I'll come up with new ideas and adjust the outline to incorporate the new ideas. I'll give you an example of some advice that Stephen J. Cannell, creator of the Rockford Files and the A-Team, gave me. He said, it's one thing to get in your car and say, I'm going to drive. It's another thing to say, I'm going to get in my car and I'm going to drive to New York. And I think I'm going to take the I-10 most of the way. That doesn't mean you won't stop at places along the way or take different routes, but at least you know you're going to New York. And to
Yeah.
start with, you're going to take the I-10. And maybe you know you're going to New York to meet a girl, or you're going to New York to go on trial, or you're going to New York to whatever. As long as you know where you're going, you can have the 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 flexibility to make up stuff along the way. But it sure makes a difference when you're writing not to be searching for your story.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like maybe, well, you know what? Now I'm wondering if Harlan Coben took it from Steven, but I remember he said something very similar. It's like a, a cross country trip. He knows he's starting in Jersey. He's going to go to California. How he's going to get there, what's going to happen along the way. He's not really sure, but he does have that end point in sight. So after you had those, well, first of all, your first novels under the pen name Ian Ludlow, which in a way you resurrected later on for your Ian Ludlow series, had that always been in the back of your mind? Like, why did you decide to kind of do that?
Well, many years after, I mean, decades after I wrote the Ian Ludlow vigilante novels, I had read, I think it was a column by Lawrence Block, where he had a friend who wrote detectives novels. We'll call them the Detective Jackson novels. And his friend's house was robbed, and the thieves got away, and the police had no clues. And Lawrence Block said, "Well, why don't you hunt him down?" And the author said, "I can't do it." What? And Lawrence Block said, "Why can't you? You do the Detective Jackson novels. You know how to go about this." He said, "Yeah, but I'm not a detective." "No, but you know how one thinks. Why don't you think like that guy?" And I also, around the same time, had friends who'd been contacted by the CIA to come up with terrorism scenarios because the CIA and FBI and other intelligence agencies, they don't have imagination. They're bureaucrats. And the great thing about authors is they have imaginations and can imagine situations that might not ever occur to a law enforcement person. And that way they can anticipate some terrorist actions that might happen. So that started coming together for me. And also, I know Lee Child. I know you do too. Nicest guy in the world. Looks like Roger Moore. He's nothing like Reacher at all. He couldn't defend himself against all these people with just a paper clip and a bagel for weapons. But he thinks like Reacher. He probably could get away with a lot of stuff like Reacher. So I thought, wouldn't it be fun if a guy wrote a detective novel or a spy novel, and maybe he consulted for the government on terrorist scenarios, and these scenarios start coming true, and he starts realizing that somebody is using his material to actually pull off these crimes, and they start coming after him, and he's got to survive. He's got to take on all these hired killers, and he doesn't know anything. All he's got is imagination. And I just thought it'd be fun to call that guy Ian Ludlow. That was just me indulging myself. And the book became a gigantic hit. I mean, it spent something like 30 or 40 days as the number one best-selling book on Amazon, and it just was huge for me. And it came off of, I think True Fiction was my first standalone novel after writing 5 books with Janet Evanovich. So it also benefited from all the fans I picked up doing those international thrillers. So it's me just having fun, keeping myself amused, but also my way of making fun of thrillers and to use a cliche, showing how the sausage is made. Ian Ludlow talks a lot about how he crafts a story and why it doesn't work in the real world, and then tries to make it work in the real world. And that was fun for me. And sort of what I did in my new book, Murder by Design. I'm deconstructing the classic whodunit trope, the quirky detective and his or her assistant. That's fun for me to go into a genre and embrace the tropes and then to subvert them.
Yeah. So you mentioned having sold the movie rights to the first novel or the series and then writing the script. According to Wikipedia here, that was with your friend William Rabkin, which I think you had also mentioned. Obviously, nothing really came of that because I don't know if it was in the green room
Well,
you
no, a
mentioned this
lot a
or,
lot came of that. Although that
well, I mean,
movie
it
didn't
wasn't
happen.
made.
No, the movie was not made,
Right.
but Bill and I went from that to writing a spec episode of Spencer for Hire that was
Dispenser
bought
for
and
Hire,
shot.
right. I want to talk about that. Can you talk about that experience? I mean, how has TV, like you hear like I think Kurt Sutter, like the reason he started working on The Shield was he wrote like I think a spec script for The West Wing and then he's, Kurt Scott, he Sons of Anarchy, whatever else. Back then, was it easier to break in than it is nowadays, or has that changed? Is it still the same? Has it
Well, the
circled
mar the
back?
world has changed. The way we consume media has changed. Media itself has changed. But it's still, I would say it's as hard as it always was to get into TV. It's just a different difficulties now. I mean, back when Kurt Sutter broke in and I broke in, the way it worked was you wrote a spec episode of a show just to show that you could capture the voice of a series and the way they tell stories, and that you could master the 4 act structure, that you could do the same show every week, only different, so that let's say you'd write a spec Law and Order, and your agent would send that Law and Order to CSI, and someone at CSI would read that and go, "Why, wow, my God, this reads like a great episode of Law and Order." If this guy can write for Law and Order, maybe he can write for me. And so that was your entree in. You had to prove you could build a bookshelf in someone else's house, that you could capture the voice of another writer and also that you understood the form of a television episode, the four-act structure and how scenes worked, and you could write something that was producible. So it was important to have three or four different kinds of specs, but also to have a feature spec so that they could read something that was entirely your own voice, where you weren't benefiting from characters that you did not create. And because that gives you a big leg up if you already have great characters to write that are not your own. And that's how you would get in to have a meeting. And at that meeting, you would pitch ideas for episodes for that show. So if CSI invited you in off your Law and Order and your spec feature, you'd pitch CSI stories. And if they liked your pitch, they might develop your story into an episode and send you off to write it. Or they might like an aspect of your pitch and develop a whole new story in the room with you. Or maybe they wouldn't like any of your pitches, but like your point of view and say, we have a story that might be right for you and work with you on that. And that freelance script would become an audition. And you might write 2 or 3 freelance scripts for CSI before they invite you on to be a staff writer. Or you do those 2 or 3 scripts for CSI, but then also write a Spencer for Hire or some other series, a Law and Order, or some other show, an NCIS. There are also some writers back in the day who could make a living just as freelancers. They didn't want to be on staff of a show. They wanted the freedom to work on all kinds of different shows and to challenge themselves and not be tied down to a particular series. But that was when television had a voracious appetite for episodes, where every series was anywhere from 22 to 35 episodes. You look at Gunsmoke and some of the shows from the 50s and 60s, they were 30 episodes. I think even Star Trek was 30 episodes a season. So that was a big mouth to feed. I mean, you really had to generate a lot of scripts. You need a lot of writers to do it. And also the economics have changed. You had reruns on independent stations and reruns that were sold overseas that were providing money. And there are only 3 networks. Well, the landscape has changed. You've got streamers, you've got networks, you've got VOD, you've got so many different ways to consume television, so many different kinds of television. And now you have, like my new show, You're Killing Me on Acorn, that are only 6 episodes. You don't need freelancers and a giant staff to do 6 episodes. So it's harder to break. It's hard to break in, but on the good side, there's more buyers than there ever was before. You have YouTube, you have Amazon, you have Netflix, you have Acorn, you have Peacock, you have so many different platforms that are showing programs. But at the same token, you have people making their own programs on YouTube and on the internet who have broadcast quality iPhones. They can do so. The whole world of television, what we think of as television, has changed. However, to do, for lack of a better term, a network show, a broadcast quality show, a prestige show, you still have to have a spec script. You still have to be able to prove you can write somebody else's voice. You still need to have a spec feature. That has not changed. But that world of starting as a freelancer, going to staff writer, then story editor, then co-producer, then producer, then supervising producer, working your way up the ladder to the point where you're running the show or people invite you to pitch series. It hasn't entirely gone away, but was in danger of becoming extinct, which is why the Writers Guild had the big strike a couple years ago, to make sure that that ecosystem was not absolutely destroyed. And now we have AI to deal with too, which is also reshaping television.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned YouTube, and obviously it's not a TV show, but what was it? That big movie just recently, The
Yeah,
Backrooms.
Backrooms began as a YouTube
Started
show.
as a YouTube show and became, now it's what, grossed over $100 million. So I want to talk real quick. So Spencer for Hire was the first series you worked on, and you worked on, I mean, like I mentioned in the intro, a lot of shows people would be familiar with, Diagnosis Murder, The Cosby Mysteries, Flipper. But I want to talk a little bit about Baywatch.
Oh God.
How did you end up there on Baywatch? And most importantly, did it become a thing where it was like, okay, like in the script, like, okay, this is where the montage goes?
Okay, how do I phrase the Baywatch story? Um, I had been on a show that didn't go well. I was on Hunter, and it was not a pleasant experience being on Hunter. And back in the day, television had sort of a musical chairs situation for writers. Every year around May, right after the networks decided what pilots were going to series, you had the game of musical chairs. You had to quickly find a place to sit before the music stopped, because once all the series staffed up, you wouldn't get a job. Not until they were up and running and then open to freelance scripts. So there's a big gold rush to, not even gold rush, not the way to put it, but there's a big rush to get the few available seats at the table on writing staffs back in those days. And I had landed on Bill Rabkin and I had landed on Hunter, and it didn't go well. And we left Hunter, I don't know, maybe 3 months into our jobs. We wrote the season premiere and we left. And there weren't a lot of openings. There wasn't a place. I mean, I had a family. I had to feed my family. And there was some trouble at Baywatch. And a good dear friend of mine named Ernie Wallengren, his credit on TV is E.F. Wallengren. He ran Falcon Crest and worked on the Waltons and a bunch of other shows. We'd worked with him on a series. And he was taking over as the showrunner of Baywatch. And he heard we were available and said, I want you on Baywatch. And we said, great, can you send over the pilot? He said, no. We said, why not? He says, if you see the pilot, you won't do the show. He's like, I need you guys desperately, and I'm afraid if you see it or watch it, you won't do it. Please come on the show. So we didn't have jobs. So we said, sure, we'll go on the show. And then we saw the pilot. It's like, oh, God, what we've gotten ourselves into. I mean, I remember we're all sitting in a room going, all right, I have an idea for a story. There's a guy in the water, and he's drowning. He's having a hard time. He's in a rip. And a lifeguard sees him. And the lifeguard grabs the rescue can and he runs down the ramp. He dives in the water and he gets caught in the rip and he rescues the guy. And they barely make it back to shore. And he got to give the guy mouth to mouth. And he rescues him. All right. That's all lifeguards do. That's it. And there was one guy on our show. He said, I could come up with stories for the home shopping channel. I can't think of shit for this show. I mean, that's why you end up having these ridiculous plots on that show. And it was the season I worked on was the first season on NBC. And it was rough. We had a huge budget, and I mean, it was fun. I mean, we were on I say it was rough creatively, but it was fun, and the people we were working with were a lot of fun. The guys who created the show were great guys. Greg Bonan, who was a lifeguard, was a pleasure to work with. And, we're out in the sun and the beach and having story meetings in the sand. And so the vibe was great. But, God, it was not a good show. And when the show got canceled, a lot of us were going, oh, thank God. We can move on to other things. But look what happened. It became, this big syndicated series. But I'll tell you a funny story. They came to Bill and I about going on the show, and it was picked up. And my agent at the time said, don't do it. If you look up Baywatch in the Webster's Dictionary, the definition is career suicide. and to some degree, he was right. I think a lot of the writers who worked on the Baywatch series had a very hard time getting jobs after that, because you're not going to get a job on the West Wing or Law and Order if the only work you can show for the last 7 years are Baywatch episodes. That it became maybe financially successful for a lot of the writers on it, but kind of a drag when they got off the show trying to find other work.
So were you invited to write for Baywatch Nights?
I'm trying to decide whether I should answer that question. Well,
that's okay. Well, let's move on.
I guess by the way I hesitated, yes, but it was during this period where they tried to turn Baywatch Nights into X-Files. So it was. I remember Baywatch Nights. It was like Mitch Buchanan, the lifeguard, was Peter Gunn, private detective by night, but never talking about it in the Baywatch episodes. And then when that didn't work so well, they decided to turn into X-Files. So he'd be on Baywatch Nights fighting werewolves and vampires and aliens and finding doorways to the dimensions. But the next day when he's in the lifeguard tower and they say, hey, Mitch, how was your weekend? I would say I had to fight with a werewolf and there was a succubus who wanted to suck the life out of me. And no, he's fine just diving in the water and rescuing people. When he was in a doorway to hell just last night. It was ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Speaking of other dimensions, you also did an episode of Sliders.
Yes, that was a lot of fun. We did I think the second or third episode shot, and they wanted Bill and I on staff, but by the time they offered us that gig, we had already accepted the Cosby Mysteries. And I don't know if we dodged a bullet or walked into one by doing the Cosby Mysteries. That was not a successful show. That was a difficult show to do. And that was all before the whole scandal with Bill Cosby, but
Yeah.
it was not a good show.
So in between all this writing for TV, and probably writing your own scripts for whatever else, you were still finding time, I guess, to write. I mean, so from the Ludlum books or the Ludlow books, like when did you start writing your own stuff again? Or did the Monk books or the Murder Diag or like, I mean, what came basically how did you get to here when you started like kind of like doing your own standalones, your own series and everything
So it was
else?
it was the vigilante books that got me into publishing, though I did do some nonfiction books about the entertainment industry, which is sort of a different
Yes, real
pursuit.
quick. Let's before you get to that, your big one was Unsold Television Pilots
Yeah.
1955 to 1989. How did that come about, and how much research? I mean, like even like the look inside. I mean, obviously there's a lot of shows that like a lot of shows that people probably don't even remember that
I
were out
started
for
writing
like
that book when I was 9 years old.
wow.
9 years old. It always fascinated me, television pilots. And I collected the information when I was a kid. When I was in college, by the way, I also sold that book while I was in college. Um, that book I researched 1 day a week. I mean, I even got course credit. I was a Bachelor of Arts major in communications, and I convinced the department to let me do the research for my book as course credit. And I had to write not so much a thesis, because the book became sort of the thesis, but I had to write sort of papers on what I was doing, what I was learning about the field by doing this research. But that book taught me a lot about the television industry and was a huge bestseller when it came out. Even Johnny Carson had a bit on it. It used to be on YouTube. They pulled it, where Johnny Carson read the book, loved it, and talked about it, and then said there were some pilots Lee missed, and he made a whole comedy routine out of that. And then every guest he had on the show that night, he asked about their unsold pilots. Entertainment Tonight did a big thing about it, and I got a ton of press. If you Google Lee Goldberg and unsold pilots, you'll find a lot of those old media things. And
So,
then
and
I
I'm
did.
sorry, Lee, real quick, because you mentioned Carson. Like for people, I mean, there's late night hosts now, Colbert's obviously off the air, but like Johnny Carson was huge. I mean, how did you like were you watching that night when it happened? I mean, like
No, no. What
how did it
happened
come
was
to you to like to be aware that that happened?
I got a call from the Tonight Show saying that Johnny Carson read my book and loved it, and he'll be talking about it tomorrow night on the show. We would like you to come down, dress well. We're going to put you in the audience. Johnny will know you're there. There's a possibility he may ask you to stand up. He may even ask you to come down. You just need to be ready. So here are here are your tickets. You need to come an hour early, and they made sure I had makeup on and all that. And I didn't meet him though. I did not meet him. But I was placed in the audience, and I was like, "Oh my God, they're gonna call me what?" And then he did his thing with Ed McMahon talking about my book and reading some of the pilots from the book that I had found, and talking about how much he enjoyed it, and asking Ed about his pilots, and then he did the comedy routine of here are some pilots Lee missed, and it was all fake pilots, and I can't remember all the guests. I think Alan Alda may have been one of them, but he asked about each guest what pilots they did, but I was always afraid he was going to call me up or, at least say, Lee Goldberg's out there in the audience, stand up. And he never did that. But it was fine. I wasn't disappointed. I was just
Yeah.
thrilled that Johnny Carson, who I watched, every night, was talking about it. And they were very kind. They sent me a video cassette of the show, so I had it. But I mean, to give me an idea how popular the book was, I was flown out to Washington, D.C. to be on CBS News Night Watch with Charlie Rose. And they put me up in a hotel in D.C. and had me on. And I mean, I did a ton of press for that book. And it was great. And then CBS asked me to do a special based on the book, and then a few years later, ABC did. So that was a whole separate industry. That was a whole different line of my career. But you asked about how I got back into publishing after those vigilante books. I went many, 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 many years without writing fiction novels. I was really just invested in my TV career. And I wrote an episode of a series that didn't last long on Fox called Likely Suspects. It starts Sam McMurray as a homicide detective who solved crimes with his new partner, you, the viewer. The camera was a character. It was the point of view of his partner. And so you, the viewer, saw everything that Detective Marshak saw. It was a really innovative show. I didn't create it, but it was really a good whodunit. And we got nominated for, I think, for our scripts, 2 Edgar Awards. And my literary agent, who I thought had disappeared, called me up out of the blue And by that time, I was on a series called Cobra that was shooting up it was a Stephen Cannell series that was shooting in Vancouver. And my agent said, "Look, you've been nominated for an Edgar Award, actually two of them. And it's the Oscar of mystery writing. And if you write an outline and a sample chapter based on this Edgar Award nomination, I can get you a book deal." So I was stuck in a hotel room in Vancouver, and I was dealing with a very difficult actor on a show I wasn't too fond of. So I wrote a book called, or a pitch, and a sample chapter for a book called My Gun Has Bullets. The mob is bringing their way of doing business to TV. They don't cancel series, they kill them. And I was basically just acting out all my own resentments and problems that I was having on the show in this sample chapter, thinking it would go nowhere. And he got me a three-book deal at St. Martin's. And so suddenly I was back in publishing, and I think the book came out in 1994 or 5. It's called My Gun Has Bullets. And then I did a sequel called Beyond the Beyond about crazy science fiction fans while I happened to be on a show called SeaQuest where I was dealing with crazy science fiction fans. So once again,
Request,
it was
yes.
psychiatric help for me to work on that book. And then those books, I mean, I can tell you the reason why, but the second book did not do well, the science fiction one, because it had the worst cover in the history of covers. Well, I will tell you. The book was called Beyond the Beyond. And I was sitting at home one day and I get the cover sent to me. And I'm not making this up. Do I have a copy of the book here to show you? No, you guys have to just look it up on the internet. Just Google Beyond the Beyond Lee Goldberg. I get this cover and it's a television hanging from a palm tree with a giant steel penis coming out of it against a piss yellow background. And I said, "This cover is horrible." They said, "What's wrong with it?" I said, "It's a penis." And they went, "No, Lee, it's not. It's a rocket ship." I said, "No, it's a penis. I've seen rocket ships. I own a penis. I'm telling you that's a penis. You put that cover on my book, and my book will die." And they went, "Lee, we're St. Martin's Press. We've been doing this for 100 years. You write your little books and let us worry about the cover." Well, this is back in the day when they sent you on nationwide book tours. So my book came out. I went to all of these bookstores, and the booksellers all said, "We can't put this book cover out. It's got a giant penis on the cover." And the book tanked, and they blamed me. I said, "You don't think it was the giant piss yellow background with a giant steel penis on the cover?" Even my mom was embarrassed to read the book around the pool in Palm Springs because they thought she was reading porn. So she took a dust jacket from a James Patterson book and put it over mine. So go,
Yeah, I just
I'm
Googled
not
it. It's
exaggerating,
people should
ladies and
Google it,
gentlemen.
definitely.
Go take a look at the book cover. When I republished the book, when it went out of print, I republished it under the title Dead Space, and I put obviously a new cover on it. And it did, I sold far more books self-published in the out-of-print title than I ever did when it was in print from St. Martin's Press.
And then, of course, you started doing the Diagnosis Murder book series, the Monk series. But then, I guess, in between those, were you still doing kind of your own stuff, or were you focused on TV writing and then those tie-ins?
I'm trying to remember when I wrote The Walk, which was a standalone thriller, but I was really busy with TV, and at one point I got a call from Penguin Putnam. They were having great success with the Murder She Wrote books, and they wanted to do something to capitalize on that, and they licensed Diagnosis Murder and discovered that the executive producer of Diagnosis Murder was a published novelist. So out of the blue, they offered me, I think it was a 3 or 4 book deal to write Diagnosis Murder books. And it was for terrible money compared to TV. And I had already left Diagnosis Murder, and I had done 100 episodes of that show, and I thought, I have no more stories to tell. And I said no. And then an hour later, I realized, are you out of your mind? They're offering you a 4 book deal. It's your way back into publishing. Who cares if the money's shit? You're making money in TV, and there are stories you couldn't tell on Diagnosis Murder because it would have been too expensive, or it would have been too many shooting days for Dick Van Dyke. So I called back and I said, yes, I'll do it. I've been on cold medication. I wasn't thinking straight. And I ended up writing, 8 Diagnosis Murder books. And towards the end of those 8 Diagnosis Murder books, I got the deal to write the Monk novels. And I was writing 4 books a year at that time, a new book every 90 days. Well, I was also working on a television series, and it was killing me. And I had to choose between the Monk books and the Diagnosis Murder books, and I chose Monk. That's why I ended up doing 15 Monk novels and only 8 Diagnosis Murder books.
Yeah. Um, We are coming up on about 45 minutes. I don't want to keep you too long because we, of course, want to talk about your brand new book, Murder by Design, and then also your new TV series that you're working on. But before that, the Dead Man series. So there was Dead Man series. This was a thing. I think when Amazon was they were trying a lot of different things. I think was this when they were doing the more serialized
No, no, that
novels or?
the serialized novels is what killed the Dead Man. The Dead Man was something I launched on my own, as because
Oh,
I
that's
thought
right. And then they picked it up.
self-publishing
That's right. That's right. Yep.
self-publishing has to be good for something more than the novel you have in your drawer or republishing your out-of-print backlist, which is what I was doing. I was just getting the out-of-print rights back to my books and republishing them with new covers and making a fortune doing it. Like you said, it was the gold mine period. I was thrilled to have all these out-of-print books I could bring back. But I thought it wasn't using the Kindle to its potential. What if I could write books specifically for the Kindle that people could read on the subway going to work and finish on the subway going home from work? That would that would also follow the episodic TV model where Bill Rabkin and I had written a spec pilot for USA Network. It didn't go forward. But as part of that development experience, we had to write the pilot and 12 episode outlines. So I thought, what if I took The Dead Man, our USA project, and made it a Kindle book series? And Bill and I would write the first two, and then we would freelance out the other episodes. We would give these stories to writers, and they would write them, and it'd be work for hire, but just like a TV series. And we would run it like a TV show. And then if those 12 were successful, then we would bring in writers to pitch, and we would split the money 50-50 with them, that was coming in, and that would be that. Well, the first three, maybe it was four, Dead Men books did absolutely fantastic. They were huge. And we also got a lot of publicity for them. And I got a call from Amazon, which I never heard from Amazon before. I didn't know they had people there. And they called up and they said, we've been watching your Dead Man books and how they're doing, and they're doing great. They do even better if we published them. And we'll not only publish them in ebook, but we'll also do them in paperback and audio. And we'll let you have complete control. Do exactly what you're doing now, only we'll pay for everything. And we'll give you covers. And I said, no, I have someone I love doing the covers. And Yaron Ten Berge, by the way, he can do your covers now too. He's still doing covers. He's fantastic. Um, they just gave me complete autonomy, and we put out a book a month for 2 years. And what finally killed the Golden Goose was they had, I can't remember what it was called, but they had a serialized Kindle thing where they were taking books and kind of parsing them out in
Yeah. In
two
like five or
chapter
six
bites.
parts or whatever. And then,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they wanted to take the last three or four books in our deal and do them as one of those Kindle serials. But they also wanted to stand alone. So we did a book that was called Dead Man Reborn with a different lead. And four of us got together and wrote it in these bite-sized pieces. And they said it'll be huge. When the book comes out, we'll promote the hell out of it, but we'll also promote all the previous Dead Man novels on the same day. It'll be a bonanza. It'll be good for the new, whatever their serialized thing was called at the time. It'll be great for the Dead Man. It'll launch you into another season of the show. We were calling it like a season of a show, season of books. Um, so we did it. The day the serialized book was supposed to launch, I went to the page and there was nothing. No announcement, no nothing. Everybody who'd been in charge of that project was gone. There were new editors, and they had just forgotten our book had launched. So they belatedly put it up. And there were no links to the book series. There was no promotion. They didn't do any of the things they promised. And the Dead Man died. And they blamed it on me. I said, no, you got the golden goose, you shot it in the head, and then you took the remaining gold eggs that were around and you stomped them with a sledgehammer, you idiots.
That is
Had I
traditional
not been so
publishing.
busy, I would have taken the Dead Man back and just kept running it. But I had too much going on. I couldn't go back to doing it. So just we left it with the 24 books and the Reborn. Dead Man.
Yeah, I remember you had a contest because actually a writer I know won the contest.
Yeah,
Barry, he
yeah.
had,
It was
yeah,
a
because
good
that
one too.
was, yeah.
We
Uh,
They also had the fanfic Dead Man. Remember they started that
oh, that's
fanfic
right. Yeah, because Blake Crouch
Kindle
had asked me to do
Worlds?
one of his Wayward Pine ones, and they had that for a while before they opened it up basically to just anybody, and it was a free for all.
Yeah, so they asked me to let Dead Man books be Kindle World books. So I think there were, I can't remember, a dozen of them that people had done. And at first I was curating them. If they weren't really that good, I didn't let them happen. But then it became just a free for all, and anybody could write them. And then same thing would happen with Kindle Worlds. Amazon abruptly shut it down, and a lot of these books got orphaned. So at that point, I had a publishing company, and there were 3 or 4 Kindle Worlds books that I liked, and so I reached out to those authors and said, "Look, I don't want your books to be lost and impossible to find, and I own the IP. So all those other people who wrote Kindle Worlds fanfic, Deadman novels, can't post their books. I own them. They can't republish them. So, but for these 3 or 4, I said, let me publish them through my publishing company. I'll give you 100% of the money. I just want you to be able to have them out there, and they haven't really sold, but at least they're in print. Those authors are able to order copies and see them available.
Yeah, speaking of which, Brash, are you still doing Brash books?
We have Brash Books and our cutting edge imprint,
Again,
and
how do
it
you find the time with everything else going on?
I think I think we've been out 12 years now, Brash, and I think Cutting Edge is 5 years. I think Brash has published, you can easily go on the site and find out. I think Brash has published 300 or 400 titles, and Cutting Edge has published 400 titles. We've got hundreds of titles. I think it's total around 700, something like that, of out of print books, public domain books, original novels. Brash Books is all crime and thriller, and our cutting edge imprint is everything. It's lesbian pulp fiction, it's westerns. The only thing it's not is science fiction because I'm not a fan of science fiction novels, and I don't want to read them and judge if they're worthwhile. So we don't have a lot of science fiction. We have some nonfiction, and it's booming. I mean, Brash Books and Cutting Edge have been doing great. The problem is, to be honest with you, we get inundated with submissions. We probably get, I'm not exaggerating, a dozen submissions a day at Brash. And 99.9% of it is unreadable swill. Or they send us stuff we say we don't want. Like they just ignore the submission requirements. So it's
Yeah.
it's it's hard to find the time to slog through all that and find the diamonds in the rough, but we do find them.
Yeah.
And it's totally in the black. It's self-sufficient, so it pays for itself, the publishing company. I don't feel a pressure to do a certain number of releases every year. If I can't find books that I can be excited about, either ones that have fallen out of print or new ones, I don't publish something. It's just we don't feel a need anymore to have so many books out each quarter. We did for a while, but not anymore.
So speaking of like sci-fi, I remember you said before that you really sci-fi is not a thing that you do much, but correct me if I'm wrong. You had published a standalone Calico, right? Is
Yeah,
that
that was science
somewhat
fiction.
is that
Yeah.
somewhat science fiction? That was, I mean, if you look at your work as a whole, that seemed, I don't want to say necessarily diversion because you've done other speculative stuff, obviously the Dead Man, but like I don't know, that just was that was an
Well, I
interesting
think
book.
speculative is a good word. It wasn't science fiction; it was speculative fiction, and the Dead Man is horror. And I've done science fiction TV shows. I did Deadly Games and Sliders and SeaQuest. But science fiction is not in general something I read. I like watching it. I like watching Andor, and I love Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. But it's not something I naturally gravitate to. It's not my. I wouldn't know if I was necessarily running headlong into a cliche and something that's been done to death. Whereas I'm very, very comfortable in the Western genre, in the crime and thriller genre. I think I have a good barometer of what's new and fresh and what works as an editor and as a writer. I mean, our biggest hit at Cutting Edge, maybe as well as Brash, is 2 Westerns written by James Robert Daniels that just have been huge successes. And he couldn't get his book published, and I read it, and it just blew me away. And thankfully, a lot of readers have fallen in love with it.
Yeah. Um, okay, well, let's the time
Oh yeah, my
remaining.
book, my new book that came out 2 days
You have
ago.
a new
It's
book. This is one of the many, many, many books. This is the you have a lot of series, a lot of your own series. I mean, not like the monks and the other one, but like how many series have you done so far?
well, I've done a lot of series that aren't all currently in print. I mean, I am not
Yeah.
doing any more Ian Ludlow books. Obviously, I haven't done the Monk and Diagnosis Murders, and I'm not doing the Fox and O'Hares with Janet Evanovich anymore, or the Dead Man. But as far as my own active series, I have the Eve Ronin series, which is probably the most successful books I've ever written. We've sold millions of copies of those, and they're being developed into a TV series. I'm about to start writing. I'm losing track, the eighth or ninth book in that series. Um, I have the Sharpe Walker arson investigation cocreator series that crosses over with Eve Ronin. And now I have Edison Bixby, which is a departure. It's something more like Monk. It's a quirky detective. It's told first person. It's a old-fashioned whodunit for a new generation. I'm trying to make it fresh. And it's exercising a different muscle. It's a different voice, and it's much more of a comedy as opposed to a gritty police procedural that has some comedy in it.
Yeah, so your PR team sent over, they said that the series marks a bold and witty reinvention of the classic whodunit, and that you had said before that you created your most eccentric detective yet. Um, like specifically, why would you say? I mean, now is that your thought, or is this what the publisher is saying?
So the publisher and publicist are saying,
Okay. Well, okay. Well, what I want to ask you, so, and this is really, sometimes I get really geeky on this. So this is written first person.
yes,
The majority of your novels are, and correct me if I'm wrong, mostly third person.
yes.
Mostly third person past tense. You have a few that are like, like I guess when you starting a new project, do you just immediately kind of feel in your gut, okay, this is going to be written in, third person past tense, third person present,
Yep.
first person, or are there times where you start a book and then like a couple chapters in, it's just not feeling right, and you go back and kind of maybe switch up the tense or the point of view?
No, I know going in what tense I'm going to write the book in. The Eve Ronins, Sharpe Walkers, they are police procedurals, and I want the authorial voice to disappear. I don't want you to hear me at all. I want you to hear me maybe in the first two paragraphs, and then forget you're reading. If I write something clever or uniquely constructed in the prose, it just draws attention to the book is written. It reminds you you're reading. I want you to get so caught up in what I'm writing that you forget you're reading something. It becomes a movie that you're caught up in. It becomes a TV show in your brain or becomes a multimedia experience. You forget you're reading. So I try to write as lean and as spare as I can and let the dialogue and action of the characters drive the story. But when you write something first person, it's all in the authorial voice. And the reader is very much aware that they're being told a story by a person. And it's a different way of telling a story. And it's also limiting in your point of view. You're in one point of view, and that point of view is biased. And that point of view is affected by the emotions and needs and conflicts of the person telling the story. So that's also something to think about when you're approaching a book. Now, we talked about my Ian Ludlow spy novels. Those were told from multiple points of view. And those points of view might have a different authorial voice, just so you're aware you're in the different point of view. But even then, after the first paragraph or two, I want the authorial voice to disappear. So, yeah, I think very much about the voice and the structure. I got accused once as a derogatory term that I'm not a writer, I'm a craftsman. And I actually was complimented by that. I think it's a craft. You
Yeah.
need to think about how your house is constructed and what the architecture is going to be and what the feeling the house is going to have. That's part of design. A book is a design. I'm designing a story and building a world in your head. All writers are designers. And that's part of what led me to Edison Bixby. When I write a TV show, I'm writing a story that has to be created. I have to build sets, or I have to take existing places and make them fit the story I'm telling. That's design. That's subverting existing design for my need, which is to tell you a story. And that there's an old cliche about the world as a stage. It really is. We move around sets that have been built to control our behavior, to make us do things. And Edison Bixby is a detective who solves crimes by looking at how the built world or the devices and tools we use that have been designed made the crime not only possible, but maybe inevitable. So that's how he reverse deconstructs a crime to find out who did it. And I know that sounds very dry, so I had to come up with a character who's the opposite of that. A character who's colorful and bigger than life and fun. And if you look at all these whodunits, they're essentially the same. It's always an outsider. It's always, you look at Nero Wolfe and Sherlock Holmes and Adrian Monk and Hercule Poirot. Nero Wolfe's this morbidly obese guy who never leaves his house. Everyone has to come to him. Sherlock Holmes is an asshole cocaine addict. The one relationship he had is with a lunatic woman. You look at Adrian Monk, he's got obsessive compulsive disorder. He's afraid of germs. He doesn't have any romance in his life. Hercule Poirot, who knows what the hell that guy's into? He has no love life. He just exists to solve crimes. So I created a detective who's drop dead gorgeous. He's the handsomest guy in any room. He's absolutely wealthy. And he's witty and he's wonderful. And he gets laid every night of the week. He's the opposite of all those guys. But he has a weakness. At the scene of one of these crimes, when he solves the crime and makes the brilliant bad guy look stupid, the brilliant bad guy shoots him in the face. And as a result, Edison Bixby has a neurological disorder that makes it very difficult for him to think before he speaks. If someone says to him, "How do I look in this dress?" he'll say, "Fat." You know, he will say whatever's on his mind. He doesn't have an internal filter. Now maybe he has more of one than he lets on, because it does put people off their game and off balance and allows him to hone in and solve the crimes a little faster. But it's caused a problem with him. He can't be on the police force anymore. He's causing too many lawsuits. He's offending too many people. So he has to take on an assistant to kind of be his apologist and to help him with his cases now that he's an insurance investigator. So that's sort of the way into this book. That's the franchise, as it were, the quirky detective superpower and what makes him different. But he and Wally are not unaware of where they fit into the world of quirky detectives. I reference Monk and Sherlock Holmes and Nero Wolfe in the telling of this story. The book is written by Wally Nash, the assistant who's never written a book before. So he's trying to stumble along and figure out what the rules of writing books are. So it's a way for me to give you what you want as a whodunit quirky detective novel, but also to show you how it's done and to subvert the tropes a little bit, to have some fun with it.
Yeah, and again, the title is Murder by Design. Publishers Weekly calls it a
Oh,
cross between James Bond and Adrian Monk.
sorry,
And
my
the
phone.
kind folks over at Best Thriller Books say that Lee Goldberg has outdone himself, delivering a murder mystery that demands to be read and will end up being ranked at the top of any serious list of extolling the best books of 2026. We're not even halfway through well, technically, I guess we are now. We're halfway through the year, and they're already saying it's one of the best books of 2026. So congratulations. How
Thank
do
you.
you manage to juggle? I guess, and this probably goes back to just doing all the different TV shows. Like, when especially when you're juggling several different series at once. I'm assuming, do you keep like a character Bible? I mean, like how do you make sure that, eventually book three in here, you don't do like some type of plot point or whatever that's going
I
to
keep
showed up like, yeah.
giant binders. And what also helps me is when my books are copy edited, the copy editor lists stuff that's already been established. This character showed up. Here's how you described them back then. Here's a fact you said. So in a way, every time I get I read a new Eve Ronin novel and I get the latest copy edit, and there's a style sheet. The style sheet tells me everything that happened in the books before, and I keep that by my desk. So if I forget, what kind of car did that guy drive, or what color eyes did I say that person had, or whatever, it's in that style sheet. But I make mistakes. It's inevitable.
I remember, and I mean, obviously, like I was going to mention Mark Greenia, he essentially has one series, but he talked about before about how, when the book, before the book comes out, you always get the PDF of the layout, like he's compiled all those into one giant PDF, so he can just easily do like a quick search for like, a character name to make sure he doesn't use like the same character name, like five
How can he
books
make that
later or
into
anything like that.
one PDF? His books are 200,000 words each. It must be a multi-million word file.
So, all right, real quick. So you've worked on a lot of TV shows. There's a current one that's currently out right now with Brooke Shields. What can you tell us about that?
It's called You're Killing Me. It's on Acorn and AMC Plus, and Brooke Shields plays a very successful author of crime novels. She's sort of like Janet Evanovich or Nora Roberts. She has a long line of crime novels, and she has a very loyal audience, but that audience is aging out a little bit. And she's forced to team up with a young podcaster who's never written a book before to work on her next book. And it becomes a very interesting creative collaboration, but they also end up solving murders along the way. It's sort of like, I don't know if you've seen Hacks. It's like Hacks, except instead of comedy writing, they're crime novels. It's the generational difference. It's the deduction versus forensics. It's not just the generation gap, but they have different ways of looking at the world. It's a buddy comedy mystery, and it's been A huge success. It's the biggest success Acorn has ever had. Biggest debut in terms of bringing in new subscribers to the streamer. We got picked up for our second season moments after the second episode aired. We've just aired our third episode, or our third episode is streaming this week. The next three are streaming over the next 3 weeks, and then we'll be back this time next year.
Speaking of streaming, there's the Netflix model where essentially almost for all their shows, a few of them they don't do it, but they'll just do the entire season. And then you have like stuff like Acorn or Apple where it's yeah, they might do like the first two episodes of a new show, but then it's from there it's like weekly. Um, do you have thoughts of which you feel is better, or is it really like per show? A whole like just dump of a binge versus a weekly?
I don't know. I mean, for myself, I kind of like to binge, but then I also don't necessarily binge them all at once. I might watch two episodes one night, one episode the next, three the night after that, or I like to be able to decide myself how much I want of a show. But also keep in mind that, for instance, take You're Killing Me. We're dropping one episode a week. But right now, you go back and watch the first two. So at the end of our 6 episode run, you have all 6 episodes there if you want to binge them. The what's nice about streaming is your show is always broadcasting. You don't just have your season and then you're off the air or you have reruns. You're always live, so your audience has a chance to actually grow. So by the time your second season comes out, you can have an enormous build in viewership. So it's nice, and with 6 episodes, you can really craft a show in a way that you can't maybe with 22, where it gets so exhausting to put out that many episodes.
Yeah. All right, so we are over an hour, and I know you're a very busy man. I know that in the green room you have more meetings later
Yeah,
today,
well,
so I
that
don't want
call
to
was
keep
actually
you.
from the show, so I'm putting them off to
So,
not to
so,
call them
but the
back.
last thing I always try to ask guys, is there anything recently you've read, watched, listened to that you really enjoyed that you'd want to recommend to others?
Two books. There's a nonfiction book that I actually went back and read a second time. Don Norman's Design of Everyday Things. It'll make you look at the world in a whole new way. He talks about all the ways we encounter design and how we're designers ourselves. And it's not as dry as I'm making it sound. It's very funny and very entertaining and very illuminating. And I just read John Sanford's latest Lucas Davenport book, Revenge Prey. I think it's Revenge Prey. And he's in his 80s. He's written something like 40 Lucas Davenport novels. And unlike some writers who get worse as time goes on, they get tired and they just keep repeating themselves, he just gets better and better with every book. He's reinvented the Lucas Davenport series as he goes and his authorial voice. And I would argue the books he's writing now are even better than the books he wrote 20 years ago in the series. He's a great writer, and he always makes me want to write more, reading his books.
Yeah. And then if people want to stalk you online, where's the best way to do that?
I'm easy to find. I'm leegoldberg.com. I'm Lee Goldberg on Facebook, Lee Goldberg on all the social media sites, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, and of course on Facebook.
And then finally, how often do you get emailed asking for weather questions?
God, two or three times a day. I am mistaken not only for Lee Goldberg in New York, but there's a Lee Goldberg in Maine as well. And Lee Goldberg, the weatherman, and I people compliment me on my clothes because they like the way he's dressed, or they'll criticize him about a book I've written. So he and I actually met when I was in New York for one of the Thriller Fests, and he had me on his show, for a full hour. Every time we came back for his weather, he would tell the weather and then interview me some more. So that was great. And to make it even more complicated, there's another crime writer named Lee Goldberg, Lee Matthew Goldberg.
Hmm.
And we'll go to conferences, and we've both had the situation where one of us had to cancel. And when the other guy gets there, he finds his room has been given up. It's like I was going to BoucherCon and Lee Goldberg couldn't make it. The other one, I got there and I didn't have a room because they thought it was my room. So that's been fun. And I get asked questions about Lee Goldberg's book, but to be fair, people ask me about Reacher just because my name is Lee.
Yeah. And then last thing, I know your brother Todd Goldberg, he had mentioned when I had interviewed him, of course, he did an anthology and he invited you to do a story. I forget what he said. I'm pretty sure he
I
told you it was supposed to be a short
yeah,
story, and you ended up writing like a 10,000 word thing. Was that
I think it was
were you just
I
kind
think
of
it was
messing with him?
14,000 words or something. But yeah, it was the biggest story in the book, and I was not messing with him. I just wrote the story that I felt like writing, and if it was too long, that was fine. Um, but no, he ended up running the whole thing. It was sort of his fault because he had sold this book and included me as a writer in it without telling me. And I remember running into the publisher at a conference, and they were having a party for all the authors. And she asked if I was coming. I said, I'm not one of your authors. Oh, come on, you're doing that book with Todd. Right, I'm doing that book with Todd. No idea what she was talking about. So I called Todd up and said, "What is this book I'm doing with you?" He said, "Oh yeah, it's a book of Jewish fiction. It's Hanukkah fiction. You're writing a Hanukkah fiction crime story." I said, "I don't know anything about Hanukkah." He said, "Just do one of I have these short stories I write now and then and self-publish, the Ray Boyd stories." And he said, "Just do a Ray Boyd story." I said, "Ray Boyd is like full of hardcore sex and violence. He's a despicable human being." He says, "Yeah, do that, but Hanukkah." So I did, and the book and my story ended up getting great reviews. And in fact, if you want to read that story, you should buy Eight Very Bad Nights. But you can also buy my Ray Boyd novellas, Crown Vic and Crown Vic 2. And you can read those short stories, some of which have been published elsewhere. But I've been collecting them as ebook originals with an intention, I think, someday of putting together a book of the previously published Ray Boyd stories and maybe some new ones. I just haven't had time to do it. I have lots of ideas for Ray Boyd stories. They're sort of like Edison Bixby.
Yeah, because you were a
With
very,
Ray
very busy
Boyd,
man.
they are super violent and full of explicit sex, and this character is an unredeemable, vicious scumbag. He's the anti-reacher. He doesn't go around the country helping people. He goes around the country helping himself. But he reads the Reacher novels just to get tips on how to survive while walking around the country. And it just allows me to be to be the opposite of everything I write about. And so some people who read my books and go to the Crown Vics going, "Oh, this can't be the guy who wrote Monk. This is so R-rated, X-rated. It's awful." Ah.
All right, Lee. I don't want to keep you any longer. Again, the latest book is Murder by Design. Real quick, what can we expect next from you?
My next book is coming out in October. It's called Split Screen. I've lost track. I think it's the eighth Eve Ronin novel, and it's a crossover with my Sharpe Walker series. And then the book I'm writing right now, The Invisible Architect, which is already available for pre-order, will be the second Edison Booksby out. Second Edison Booksby. I can't talk. Let's try one more time.
Yeah,
The
that's a tongue
second
twister.
Edison Bixby book, and it will be out in March of 2027, assuming I ever finish it.
All right, perfect. So again, Lee, thank you so much for your time, and
My
we'll
pleasure.
let you go, and we'll see everybody next time. Bye.